Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On the NewsHour tonight, President Trump's effort to deploy more National Guard troops gets caught up in the courts. We hear from the governor of one of the Democratic-led states being targeted.
After agreeing to some parts of the president's peace plan, Hamas indirectly negotiates with Israel for an end to the devastating two-year war in Gaza.
And a new term. The U.S. Supreme Court prepares to take up a case on the controversial practice of conversion therapy for LGBTQ youth.
The care that is at stake in this lawsuit is that we are allowed to speak freely.
It ends up stacking on levels of shame that a lot of people never recover from.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation.
A law partner rediscovers her grandmother's artistry and creates a trust to keep the craft alive. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your passions, and the way you enrich your community. Life well planned.
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. President Trump's plan to deploy National Guard troops to Democratic-led cities is facing significant pushback and setting up a new showdown in federal courts over the limits of his authority.
Illinois officials sued the Trump administration today to stop plans to send 400 troops from Texas to aid an immigration enforcement operation in Chicago. The lawsuit called the plan unlawful and dangerous, but a federal judge disagreed, declining to block the deployment for now. It comes just a day after a separate judge blocked the Trump administration from sending California's Guard to Oregon in response to a series of clashes outside an immigration detention facility in Portland. The president said today he wants to get the city under control and would consider invoking the Insurrection Act.
You look at what's happened with Portland over the years, it's a burning hellhole, and then you have a judge that lost her way, that tries to pretend that like there's no problem. Actually, she's not even saying that. There's a huge problem in Portland. I'll tell you what the problem is: crime.
For more on how the state is responding, we spoke earlier today with Oregon's Democratic Governor, Tina Kotek. Welcome to the NewsHour.
Hey, Jeff.
So I understand you spoke with President Trump about a week ago. How did that conversation go?
Well, it was cordial. I was very direct with him. I don't understand why you think it's necessary to have military intervention in the city of Portland. We are a beautiful, vibrant, safe city. Portland is doing well. And I believe he had at the time and continues to have misinformation, a very old, outdated viewpoint about what is happening in Portland. The protests that are happening outside the ICE facility are confined to about a 1-block radius of the city of Portland. I will say, when I spoke with him, I was like, look, I believe local law enforcement has this situation managed, always open to conversation, but we do not need military intervention here. And of course, that has continued to escalate since that initial conversation. And it's been a very long week or so of trying to manage a situation that I think is unnecessary.
And just today, the White House made the point that the current demonstrations, in their view, mirror the unrest and violence that we saw back in 2020. Here's what the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said.
For more than 100 days, night after night after night, the ICE facility has been really under siege by these anarchists outside. They have been disrespecting law enforcement. They've been inciting violence. We saw, again, a guillotine rolled out in front of this federal building. And so the president wants to ensure that our federal buildings and our assets are protected. And that's exactly what he's trying to do.
So respond to that claim, if you will.
Well, it's just a ludicrous characterization of the situation here. I will just say on Sunday, yesterday, we had hundreds of people, thousands of folks in downtown Portland running the Portland Marathon. This is not a war zone. We don't have a challenge here in terms of managing lawful demonstrations outside the ICE building. And I believe that they are looking back at information from 2020 and assuming this is the same. Look, lawful demonstrations happen in the city of Portland outside of this facility. It is being managed. What I'm seeing and what we're seeing and what the mayor is seeing on the ground is an escalation from the agents who are protecting the building, trying to antagonize those protesters who are there. And I would like to de-escalate the situation. We don't need a military intervention. And let's remember, the federal judge agreed with that argument, not once, but twice. The federal government has not made a compelling case based on the evidence on the ground that there is an actual problem as it relates to being an insurrection or a rebellion or whatever they think this is. Look, there are lawful demonstrations. If somebody crosses the line and there's criminal activity, local law enforcement is holding people accountable. That's important. The rest of the city doing fine. We have our challenges like every major city across the country. But the real problems are not the ones the president thinks they are. The real problems are other things that we should be dealing with.
Let's talk more about the judge's ruling because, as you mentioned, yesterday a federal judge temporarily blocked the deployment of National Guard troops to Portland. What's your assessment of her ruling and how does it shape your legal strategy moving forward?
Well, I want to appreciate everyone who's come forward quickly from the Attorney General's office to put a good case in front of the federal judge. What we saw is that the information that she has says there is no basis of fact that military intervention is necessary. And her first ruling was about the Oregon National Guard. When President Trump took the Oregon National Guard out of my command to deal with a situation that I believe is not based on facts, the court said, it's not the case. You need to give the control back to the governor. And then a day later, they start calling up the California National Guard to come to Oregon, calling up the Texas National Guard to come to Oregon. And the judge ruled again and said, look, I'm being very clear here. This is not lawful under Title 10. This is not a lawful deployment, and the president doesn't have a basis for doing this.
Well, in a separate but related case today, the government said that the Texas National Guard is on its way to Illinois. How should governors be prepared to respond when confronted by this type of action by the federal government?
Well, as I think we all know, the Trump administration has been an unprecedented roller coaster of decisions coming out of the White House that make no sense for states. Governors have been prepared across this country to try to react. And I have spoken directly with Governor Pritzker and Governor Newsom. In the case of Illinois, my understanding is they have also filed with the federal court for a temporary restraining order to stop that deployment of the Texas National Guard. We have to go to the courts to seek protection. We are a country based on the rule of law. Whether you are a right, left, center, we as Americans believe in the Constitution and the rule of law. And that is what should prevail here. And this isn't about Oregon or Illinois anymore. This is about every state in our country. And what President Trump is trying to do is an abuse of power, and it is a threat to our democracy. Governors should be in command of their National Guards, our citizen soldiers who sign up to stand up in an emergency to deal with real problems. What I would say to governors, and I would particularly want to talk to Republican governors, this isn't a Democrat or Republican governor issue. This is an issue for every governor. Don't volunteer your folks. This is a misuse of the authority of the president to intervene in a situation. We do not want to take our troops onto the streets of American cities to go after our own citizens. Local law enforcement across the country knows how to manage for these types of demonstrations. Let them do their job and leave our troops at home.
On another matter, it's been reported that the Trump administration, through the OMB director, Russ Vought, has canceled or frozen clean energy funding, including as much as $400 million in federal grants that Oregon stands to lose. How do you assess the impact of that decision, and what might you be able to do to mitigate the impact of those losses?
Well, this has been happening since the start of the administration. Grants that have been obligated being pulled back, money that had been promised to states, our taxpayer dollars going to D.C., coming back to our states being canceled. These are bullying tactics. It's unacceptable. We will continue to look at whether or not we have any options to fight these decisions by the president in the court. When it comes to the $400 million of clean energy grants, it is delaying our ability as a state and frankly as a country to move to clean energy, to move to more renewable clean energy for our future. One of those grants here in the state of Oregon was a $250 million grant going to the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, who were going to be behind a major upgrade in our electricity grid to move power from one side of the state to the other. That is now completely in limbo. That's jobs, that's economic development. And frankly, the president is trying to punish states that didn't vote for them. I want to back up and say, look, I took an oath when I became governor to be a governor for the entire state of Oregon, regardless if people voted for me. I wish the president would uphold his oath as well to take care of every American.
Oregon Governor Tina Kotek, thanks again for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The day's other headlines begin in Washington, where lawmakers appear no closer to reopening the government as the shutdown approaches the one-week mark. In the Oval Office this afternoon, President Trump suggested that he is open to speaking with Democrats on their biggest demand, health care subsidies.
If we made the right deal, I'd make a deal, sure.
Democrats insist that any funding bill must extend Affordable Care Act subsidies that are set to expire at the end of the year. But earlier in the day, Speaker Mike Johnson held firm that Republicans won't negotiate health care matters until after the government reopens.
We need a handful of Democrats to stop the madness, reopen the government so that we can get to these critical debates about the year-end policy decisions with regard to the further reforms to health care. Plain and simple, that's where we are.
This evening, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries called Mr. Trump's comments interesting and added that Democrats remain open to negotiating with any Republicans, including the president. On the first day of its new term, the Supreme Court rejected an appeal from Ghislaine Maxwell. Lawyers for Jeffrey Epstein's longtime associate had argued that a plea deal should have shielded her from prosecution. The court's decision means her only chance of early release would be clemency from President Trump. She's currently serving a 20-year prison term. Also today, the court declined to hear Missouri's bid to revive a law intended to negate federal gun regulations in the state. They also brushed aside a lawsuit by far-right influencer Laura Loomer against social media companies that removed her from their platforms. And the court rejected an appeal by Live Nation in a consumer antitrust case related to ticket pricing. French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu resigned just a day after announcing his cabinet and less than a month in office. His cabinet selections had faced criticism from allies and opponents alike. Lecornu's announcement adds to ongoing political uncertainty in France after President Emmanuel Macron's decision last year to hold snap elections that left the legislature deeply divided. It's now up to Macron whether to name a new prime minister or dissolve the National Assembly and call early elections. Lecornu's government will manage day-to-day affairs in the meantime. Israeli authorities say they've deported more than 170 activists who took part in a flotilla aiming to bring aid to Gaza. Climate activist Greta Thunberg was among the dozens who landed in Athens earlier today. Israel also denied accusations that the activists had been mistreated while in Israeli custody. Israel's foreign ministry posted images of their release, writing that, quote, all the legal rights of the participants in this PR stunt were and will continue to be fully upheld. Meanwhile, lawyers say at least 150 people are still being held in Israel, with dozens taking part in a hunger strike. The International Criminal Court today convicted a Janjaweed militia leader for atrocities committed in Sudan's Darfur region more than 2 decades ago.
The chamber is convinced that the accused is guilty beyond reasonable doubt of the crimes with which he has been charged.
Ali Mohammed Ali Abd al-Rahman showed little emotion as he was found guilty on 27 counts of crimes against humanity and war crimes. He had denied the charges. It is the first such conviction related to the violence in Darfur, where up to 300,000 people were killed and millions driven from their homes during a government crackdown on a rebellion starting in 2003. Abd al-Rahman faces a maximum sentence of life in prison. In Tibet, a rescue has been taking place on Mount Everest, where hundreds of hikers were trapped by heavy snow. Chinese state media reported that around 350 hikers had made their way down to a safe meeting point, while rescuers are in contact with 200 others still on the mountain. The hikers were stranded at an elevation of more than 16,000 feet. The snowstorm hit during a week-long national holiday in China, when many people travel both within China and abroad. Mount Everest has seen multiple accidents and overcrowding issues in recent years. Back in this country, South Carolina's top law official says there's no evidence to suggest that arson was to blame for a fire that destroyed a circuit court judge's home over the weekend, though the investigation is ongoing. Smoke billowed over the marshes of Edisto Island as the residence went up in flames on Saturday. Officials say 3 people were injured but did not provide details. The property is owned by Circuit Judge Diane Goodstein, who's been a state judge for nearly 3 decades. Last month, she temporarily blocked South Carolina from giving state voter data to the Department of Justice. The CDC officially updated its vaccine guidelines today to align with recommendations made by the advisory committee that was picked by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The agency is no longer recommending COVID-19 vaccines for all Americans 6 months and older. Instead, officials are encouraging, quote, individual-based decision-making. That includes checking with a medical professional, especially for seniors. The agency is also recommending a standalone chickenpox shot for toddlers rather than combining it with measles, mumps, and rubella. Many medical experts warn the committee's recommendations have led to confusion and mistrust over vaccines. On Wall Street today, stocks started the week mixed. The Dow Jones Industrial Average slipped about 60 points. The Nasdaq rose around 160 points. The S&P 500 also ended in positive territory. And a trio of scientists won this year's Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for their work on the human immune system. The committee said the discoveries of Mary Brunko, Fred Ramsdell, and Shimon Sakaguchi helped advance treatments for cancer and autoimmune diseases and could help with organ transplants. The announcement today in Sweden was the first of this year's Nobel announcements. The 3 will share nearly $1.2 million in prize money, and tomorrow the Physics Prize will be handed out. Still to come on the NewsHour, why an increasing number of Israeli reservists are refusing to be redeployed to Gaza. A leadership change shakes up CBS News. And Tamara Keith and Amy Walter discuss the state of the government shutdown.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Today, Israel and Hamas launched indirect talks in Egypt for a potential ceasefire in Gaza. The first phase of the U.S.-drafted peace plan calls for the release of the Israeli hostages in exchange for the partial withdrawal of Israeli troops. A second phase envisions the end of the war and a lasting governance plan for Gaza. Nick Schifrin's following all this and joins us now. So, Nick, give us the latest. Where do these talks stand right now?
So, Amna, as you said, the U.S. and Israel see this happening in 2 phases. The first phase, Hamas would have to release all 50 Israeli hostages. About 20 or so are believed to still be alive. And then Israel would not really withdraw, but move back to what the yellow line that you see in this map created by the Trump administration, which is still deep inside of Gaza, some 4 miles inside of Gaza in the south. Israel would also release nearly 2,000 Palestinian detainees. The U.S. and Israel believe that they're having in Cairo right now, or in Sharm el-Sheikh rather, a technocratic conversation. What's the sequencing of this movement? Does Hamas know where all the hostages are, including the deceased? But here's the thing. Hamas has not publicly agreed to the very concept of a phase 1 and a phase 2 that we've been talking about. And before today, mediators told me that Hamas was questioning key aspects of this deal, including not only the sequencing, but the very act of disarming that Israel said is required to actually seal this deal. In the past, Hamas has not been willing to release hostages unless Israel ended the war and agreed to a full withdrawal, and that is not what phase 1 demands. So what we're watching to see, Amna, is whether Hamas's thinking has changed, whether they're willing to release hostages before that step that the Israelis would take.
So if they even get to us, tell us about phase 2. What does that entail?
These are the fundamental questions that have dogged all sides since October the 7th. Let's go through some of them. A surge of humanitarian aid into Gaza, demilitarizing Hamas, allowing fighters amnesty if they renounce violence, international security force to take over Gaza, and the creation of a government led by Palestinians not connected to Hamas, and, of course, an eventual Palestinian state. Pushed whether the administration actually does support a Palestinian state this weekend, Secretary of State Marco Rubio described how much time it might take to create new Palestinian governance in Gaza.
That doesn't exist right now. That has to be built, and that's going to take time. You're not going to build that in 72 hours. You're not going to build that in 72 weeks. I mean, it's going to take some time to get to that point.
For the record, 72 weeks from now is February 2027. For his part, President Trump was more positive today about Hamas's abilities and intentions.
I think Hamas now has been, all I can say is they've been fine. They've been fine. I hope it's going to continue that way. I think it will. I really think we're going to have a deal. We have a really good chance of making a deal, and it'll be a lasting deal. We want to have peace.
To give you a sense, though, of how difficult even phase 1 will be, a U.S. official confirmed to me today that the U.S. officials part of this mediation, including Ambassador Steve Witkoff right there, and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, were not in Egypt today and will not be in Egypt until the two sides show more evidence of moving toward some kind of deal.
Meanwhile, Nick, I know tomorrow, as you know, marks 2 years since those horrific Hamas attacks, and Israel and your team have been working on stories to mark the week. Tell us about those.
Yeah, as you know, Amna, October the 7th is really a day before and a day after for the Middle East when history split. And we wanted to do a series of stories from the region. A new poll finds that 2/3 of Israelis now say the time has come to end the war in Gaza. That's the highest number since the beginning of the war. 27%, you see that in red down there, say it's not time to end the war. And that divide in Israeli society is reflected inside Israel's military, where some reservists say the war must be fought and won, and others are refusing to serve. Above Israel's largest port, the words on the hostage poster declare, "We'll bring them back, and we will rise." But Israeli military reserve Captain Ron Feiner believes the war in Gaza is leading the country astray.
After I understood that this government is not going to listen to the voice of most of the people in Israel, and they are willing to keep the war going forever, I decided that I just can't show up.
Since October the 7th, Feiner led Israeli infantry units on 3 deployments, including into Lebanon. But when he was called up a 4th time, he refused, and with 400 other soldiers, signed a petition that declared the war in Gaza is a death sentence for our kidnapped brothers and sisters, and for Feiner, a possible death sentence for his men.
I decided to refuse only after I understood there is no other way to stop this war and also help them, like my soldiers under my command that we used to fight together in Lebanon. I really care for them, and I also want to save their lives. And I actually realized that to save their lives, we have to stop the war.
In Israel's multiple wars since October the 7th, about half of the troops have been reservists, who traditionally hold territory after it's captured by active duty troops. The price that reservists have paid in Israel's longest war has been heavy, and that has led to a no-show rate reported by Israeli media of more than 40%.
There is a huge amount of people in Israel that are not willing to show up anymore.
For his refusal, Feiner went to prison. Released only because Israel went to war with Iran.
I'm ready to go to prison again. I think this is a price that is okay to pay for this kind of goal, which is for me so important and so urgent.
I have seen what's happening on the ground, and I understand that right now what we are doing is not anymore helping to bringing back the hostages.
Rafael Beash is a master sergeant in the reserves and a tank gunner who until August fought on Gaza's front line. He's been called up 3 times for a total of 300 days, deployed to both Gaza and Lebanon. And he, too, signed a petition demanding the government make a deal.
I was very tired of not being listened by the government, to do the job, to sacrifice everything and not feeling that the government really care about us.
Beash lives in Beersheba, about 25 miles from Gaza, and considers himself a strategist. He says that Israel is fighting a guerrilla war against Hamas and cannot accomplish militarily its dual goals of defeating Hamas and saving the hostages. He also warns Israel is facing a social crisis, tearing at the very fabric of Israeli society.
In my company only, and I know it's in other places in the army, 1/3 of the people who were married got divorced during the war.
And yet, he is a proud Israeli immigrant whose family moved here from France. He expects to be called up again soon and has decided, despite reservations, he will still serve.
We can try our best as civilians, like I'm doing with you, like I'm doing in everywhere in Israel, trying to push for this operation not to happen and to bring back the hostages in another way and to get out of Gaza. But when the army give an order, I think the role of a soldier is to listen.
Some experiences, they just change you.
This 22-year-old reservist is an intelligence officer. She spoke to our producer, Carl Bostic, and asked we keep her anonymous. After October the 7th, she volunteered for the reserves and has since served 420 days.
I think it's important that we have a strong army. But in this situation, where the government wants this war to go on forever, I have a responsibility to use every power I have to stop this war. The government will see it and will say, the reservists aren't joining. I'm sorry that I cursed.
And if they call you up, what will you do?
I will do whatever I can to not go. If we continue, it will go on forever.
She also calls the scale of Gaza's destruction unacceptable.
There is a lot of suffering in this world, but this is not far away. This is not in some other land which I can choose whether to care about it or not. What's happening in Gaza, my country is doing it. I care deeply, and a lot of people I know care deeply. And we are not ignorant to it, and we are not cold to it, and we care.
And she cares for her fellow soldiers. She says the war has distorted Israel's natural rhythm of life and death, and that young people especially have had to accept the pain of loss.
I'm 22. I've been to 3 funerals this last 2 years. And people my age dying, people I know, it's just a part of life at this point, and it's not something we can accept. The fight for a better future, for peace, for equality, will continue after this war. And if I have to fight it for the rest of my life, I will.
But Israel's government and other reservists believe the fight that is necessary is the one to defeat Hamas.
For me, I don't think it's a question, it's obligation to serve my country.
In the last 2 years, 23-year-old Michael Lapin has deployed 5 times for a total of more than 300 days. Like all Israelis, he was touched by terror. His grandmother lived in Nahal Oz, overrun by Hamas on October the 7th. He believes the Israeli military and the cause for which it fights is moral.
We're talking about a strip, a very small area, with a lot of tunnels, with a lot of population. I mean, we're trying the best to taking care of the civilians, but both make sure Hamas is not going to rule ever again.
He, too, is also learning to live with the pain of loss. But he has no doubt if he's called up for a 6th time, what choice he'll make.
As a brigade, we lost 8 soldiers at 10 days. I lost my captain. That's some things that never leaves you. I will go and I will serve until until I'm not needed anymore.
Lapin's day job is at a Tel Aviv sports and live music bar that's a favorite for foreigners, Mike's Place, right next to the beach. And between pours, he acknowledges how the war has divided Israel and its reservists.
What can I get you?
He refuses to judge anyone who refuses military duty.
I think everyone suffered a lot since the beginning of the war, and if some people say enough for them is enough, so I respect that. And I thank them for their service. Nobody likes wars. Wars is not a good thing, but at the end of the day, we want to end of Hamas, and we want to live in peace without any wars.
And that is perhaps where Israel is unified, saving hostages, hoping to recover from the war's damage, and ensuring the war never happens again. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
The U.S. Supreme Court began a new term today, marking the first day of oral arguments. One of the marquee cases of this term will be argued tomorrow, a challenge to a ban on so-called conversion therapy for youth. The practice broadly refers to attempts to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. It's banned in 23 states and the District of Columbia. By one estimate, some 350,000 LGBTQ adults received conversion therapy as adolescents. The Supreme Court declined to hear challenges to such bans in the past, but, as Stephanie Sy reports, this case is being heard against a backdrop of intensifying cultural and political debates around LGBTQ rights. And a warning, this story includes discussion of suicide.
And then every step you take.
Kaylee Childs has been a licensed counselor in Colorado Springs for about 10 years. Her clients are mostly adults, but she sees some families and adolescents too. And sometimes clients seek her help specifically because she's Christian.
That is the worldview on which all of my other activities lie. And so that's just going to be an inevitable part of anybody coming and talking to me. I meet them and we have a conversation. What goals, if they already have goals in mind, do they think counseling will help them accomplish?
But right now, Childs says the state of Colorado prevents her from helping some clients reach their goals. In 2019, Colorado passed a law banning treatment for those under 18 that, quote, attempts or purports to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity, including efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions, or to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attraction or feelings toward individuals of the same sex. Licensed providers who violate it face a $5,000 fine and potential loss of their license. This week, the Supreme Court is hearing a challenge to Colorado's ban. The lawsuit, backed by the Trump administration, was brought by Kaylee Childs, who argues the ban infringes on her right to free speech.
The only care that we're talking about is conversations with people who are voluntary and who are coming to my office because they want to see me. The care that is at stake in this lawsuit is that we are allowed to speak freely and that we are allowed to, by the product of that, sort through feelings, sensations, thoughts, beliefs. It's truly that we can have a conversation without the government peering into our private counseling conversation and dictating what we can and cannot talk about.
Supporters of the ban say it's not a question of free speech, but professional conduct, regulating health care by prohibiting a practice that research has shown to be not only ineffective, but also associated with a roughly twofold increase in suicide attempts.
Yeah, so this was in Spain.
Joyce Calvo's daughter, Alana Chen, was a devout Catholic who wanted to become a nun. But when she was just 14, Chen confessed to a priest that she was attracted to other girls.
He went on to tell her that was a mortal sin, which is the worst sin, you know, and it's very scary for a child to think they're going to burn in hell. And he was just telling her all these books to read and that I can help you, and she was afraid, so she wanted that help.
After her confession to the priest, Calvo says Chen received almost a decade of conversion therapy and religious counseling hidden from her parents. Chen later described her experiences and emotions in her own words.
I think the church's counsel is what led me to be hospitalized. I was feeling so much shame that I was comforted by the thought of hurting myself.
Chen died by suicide in 2019 when she was just 24.
I didn't want anyone to know why I loved God so much.
Her story was documented in the podcast Dear Alana, hosted by Simon Kent Fung, who experienced years of conversion therapy himself.
It ends up stacking on levels of shame that a lot of people never recover from. First, there's the shame that you feel for just being different, right? Then there's the shame that comes from being told that something horrible happened to you that made you this way. And then thirdly, there's the shame that happens when you can't actually change.
Colorado's law doesn't apply to unlicensed religious counselors, such as priests, who account for the vast majority of conversion therapy cases. The ban went into effect just months before Alana Chen's death. This past August, Calvo filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court.
How does my faith inform and fit with these experiences?
Julia Sadusky is a clinical psychologist in suburban Denver. A Catholic, she often works with Christian youth and adults who struggle with their sexuality or gender. She, too, wrote a brief for the Supreme Court case.
If a gay patient comes in or a transgender patient comes in and says, I don't want to be this anymore, can a clinician set that goal and be within the ethical sort of framework that you all have as licensed practitioners?
Therapy is not just about talking. It's about psychological interventions that have research behind them. When my clients come in and they do want to change their attractions, let's say, or they want to align with their sex, it's not that as a therapist I'm arbitrating that and I'm saying you're not allowed to have that goal. What I'm doing is I'm bringing in what we know from research. And what I can tell you from the research is we do not have clear protocols that help people align with their sex. And we don't have clear protocols that have been effective in changing sexual orientation.
Sadusky also argues that the ban doesn't actually prohibit the kinds of conversations Kaylee Childs wants to have with her clients.
To the credit of whoever drafted this law, they wrote into the law that you are allowed to help people with identity exploration and identity development. I don't know how much more clear a law could be about the valuing of identity work, the valuing of exploration, without having a fixed outcome.
But some disagree.
It's very explicit that this is a requirement of the law, that you cannot do anything but affirm or ignore, and that's my experience.
In northern Colorado, Erin Lee says her daughter Chloe began abruptly questioning her gender identity several years ago.
We didn't know how to talk about it, and we didn't want to say anything we couldn't take back, and so we just totally ignored it. We didn't affirm, so we didn't call her the new name. We also didn't say, you're not trans, that's not real.
Lee eventually contacted multiple therapists, but couldn't find the right fit.
We found a Christian counselor. We were not Christian at the time, but we were looking for someone who wasn't going to automatically affirm. She went through like 6 of these sessions, and she was getting worse mentally. She was becoming more withdrawn, more dark, and we thought, why isn't she getting better? But I now understand it's because counselors they're afraid. They're afraid to touch this issue. They know they can't do what they're trained to do, which is ask questions and get to the root cause of why this person's feeling that way, or help them through it. In our daughter's case, she didn't want to feel that way.
Chloe, who is now 16 and no longer identifies as a boy, has since spoken out about her experience.
I can certainly think of adolescents and people who I've witnessed suffer from this law.
Back in Colorado Springs, Kaylee Childs says she's had to turn away clients because she believes the law forces her to avoid certain conversations.
The consequence is a $5,000 fine and the loss of your license, which is the loss of your career and your livelihood. That's not a risk many people are willing to take.
Colorado officials say they haven't taken action against any provider since the law took effect. But if the High Court overturns the ban, its supporters, like Joyce Calvo and Simon Kent Fung, believe the impacts will be sweeping.
I think the tragic outcome of this is likely that we're going to see more kids feeling alienated from their families and despairing. What we're likely going to see are more stories like Alana's.
Alana eventually realized the conversion therapy wasn't working, and her writings took on a different tone.
I always thought there must be something wrong with me, not wrong with God or his rules. I feel like I've been fooled all this time. I'm so angry, I'm hurt, I still feel broken.
By then, it was too late. Her faith and her life were lost. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Tsai in Colorado.
Paramount announced today it's acquiring the Free Press, the independent news and commentary website founded in 2021 by Bari Weiss. As part of the $150 million deal, Weiss will also take on a new role at CBS News as editor-in-chief. A former opinion editor at the New York Times, Weiss describes herself as a centrist politically and is known for pushing back against what she calls woke orthodoxy in mainstream media. She alleged a culture of intolerance when she resigned from the Times. After the announcement, Weiss posted a video message saying, in part, this.
What does it mean for CBS News? It means a redoubled commitment to great journalism. It means building on a storied legacy and bringing that historic newsroom into 2025 and beyond. Most of all, it means working tirelessly to make sure CBS is the most trusted news organization in the world.
For more on what this means for CBS News and the broader media landscape, I'm joined by Oliver Darcy. He's founder and lead author of the media newsletter Status. He also co-hosts his podcast called Power Lines. Oliver, welcome to the NewsHour. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So before we talk about what this all means, just tell us a little bit more about Bari Weiss. I mean, this is someone who criticized Trump in his first term. She's also staunchly defended Israel, decried woke culture in colleges and media. How would you describe her voice and her role in the media landscape?
Sure. I think she's unquestionably, and she probably would concede this herself, a very polarizing figure. She is someone who is difficult to really put in one bucket. You wouldn't say she's, for instance, a MAGA media personality, but she's certainly not on the left either. I think the best way actually to maybe describe her is what she stands against, what she rails against, and that really does end up aligning her more with conservatives. She is, for instance, very anti-DEI, anti-woke, as you said. She has been a very staunch critic of the mainstream press, and I think at times has been actually fairly dishonest in the way she's portrayed how the press operates and how it reports, and suggested, for instance, that it is biased, it's unfair, it doesn't take into account the conservative point of view. And while she has been critical of Trump at times, or the Free Press has been critical of Trump, I can't help but say that, if you go to the Free Press on a regular basis, it's a right-wing opinion blog, really at the end of the day. And while it does criticize Trump occasionally, the main threat I think you would take away, you would say the main threat to Western civilization is not Trump and the creeping autocracy in this country. It's really initiatives like DEI or being too woke. And that is the real main threat to Western civilization, to America. And that's what David Ellison is buying today. It's this right-wing opinion blog that really pushes those narratives.
Well, so what does this mean for CBS News then, Oliver, for a fierce critic of mainstream media to now be in charge of one of the legacy institutions here? It's home to story journalism brands like 60 Minutes. What does that mean for CBS News, and what are you hearing from folks inside?
I think there's real concern inside CBS News about what this means. I don't think anyone really knows what it means. I think we can read the tea leaves, right? And if you follow Bari Weiss, she's been, again, critical of the way the mainstream press has operated, critical of the way, for instance, it covered the pandemic and the election of Donald Trump and a number of other things. So I think what we'll likely see is them work to fold in what they would say are conservative views, which end up being pro-Trump views. I think that's certainly likely to happen at CBS News. But there's a real question of how involved Bari will be in guiding this organization editorially. Is this a editor-in-chief title that she's being given, but she's really not going to be in the lead? Or is she actually going to be
on those 9 a.m. editorial meetings directing coverage. That remains to be seen, and I think that's what CBS News are thinking, or staffers are wondering today. Like, how involved is she going to be programming a program like 60 Minutes? Is it going to be very hands-on, or is she going to let the program operate fairly autonomously like it has for decades? That's unknown.
So give us the bigger media picture landscape here now, because when you look at the Ellison family here, right, you have Larry Ellison, the father of David Ellison, who's the founder of Oracle. Larry he's a strong Trump supporter as well. He's also now among the investors in this newly configured American version of TikTok. The family's also aiming to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery. This father-son duo now controls huge swaths of the media, both in social media and in Hollywood and on television. How does that change the landscape?
Yeah, these are the new media titans of our age. Like you said, they already control Paramount, which means they control CBS News, the Paramount Pictures studio, and now they are, to my understanding, according to sources, preparing a bid for Warner Brothers Discovery, which obviously has the Warner Brothers studio, controls HBO Max, and also has CNN. And so what you could see soon is David Ellison and his son, Larry Ellison and his son, David Ellison, controlling a large part of how Americans absorb the information from around the world, the news, as well as entertainment. They could own TikTok, they could own Paramount, they could own Warner Brothers, they could own CNN, CBS News. This would be, really unprecedented amount of control over how people get their information, how it's shaped, how culture is shaped. And it's coming from people, again, who have been at the very least sympathetic to Donald Trump. Larry Ellison is an ally of Donald Trump. He's been at the White House. And as part of this deal, David Ellison agreed to a number of concessions to get this deal across the finish line at CBS News. So they installed the conservative ombudsman there. They're obviously bringing on Barry Weiss and a number of other things. So I think it's at the very least concerning here.
Oliver Darcy from the media newsletter Status joining us tonight. Oliver, thank you. Good to speak with you.
Thank you.
Well, it is day 6 of the federal government shutdown, and there are no signs of the stalemate ending. To discuss that and more, we're joined now by our Politics Monday duo. That's Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter and Tamara Keith of NPR. So, as I said, it doesn't seem like anything's going to change soon. The House is out again this week. The Senate is expected to vote again today. That vote is expected to fail. So, Tam, what could break this logjam?
Probably the most likely thing to break the logjam is some sort of pressure coming to bear. And what I mean is paychecks not going out. When you get to a point where paychecks aren't going out in the past shutdown in 2018, and 2019, that finally ended in part because TSA agents weren't coming to the office or weren't going to the airport because their paychecks weren't coming through. So there hasn't been a real forcing mechanism just yet. The public outcry isn't really there. It's obviously a really big deal here in Washington, D.C. It's less of a big deal in other parts of the country at this point. We did see the president today, and this is a little confusing, say that they were negotiating with Democrats about health care, which is the issue that Democrats are sort of asking for negotiations on. The issue, though, is Democrats on the Hill and Republicans on the Hill who've spoken to my colleagues say there are no negotiations. So maybe the president is spelling out a potential path going forward, but he's spelling out a future path that doesn't currently exist.
And Amy, there's some new polling from CBS News and YouGov that shows everyone is getting bad marks for how they're handling this. Yeah. About half of Americans disapprove of how the president and Republicans and how Democrats in Congress are dealing with this. Might public pressure change anything?
Well, it's clear, I think, as Tam pointed out, that it's still in the theoretical realm right now. And so when it gets into the realistic realm, whether it's TSA agents or whether it's other government services that impact people being cut or stymied, then you may see the pressure coming on. Right now, Democrats feel heartened by the fact that Republicans are still getting a little bit more of the blame in a lot of these public polls. But To me, the bigger question has always been, why do Democrats want to do this, and what are they going to try to extract from this process? A lot of it driven by, as we've talked about before, the ways in which the Democratic base is so frustrated with what they see as a feckless leadership in Washington. When you looked at that CBS poll, though, only about 48% of Democrats think today that this is worth it, that the shutdown is worth it, that trying to get concessions from Republicans on health care, that is not yet breaking through to a majority of even Democratic voters. And so at the end of the day, if Democrats do end up voting for reopening the government by allowing cloture to happen, then will the base feel like they got something out of this? Or will they feel as if this was yet another fight that Democrats lost to Donald Trump?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the National Guard deployments, because as we reported on this program earlier, both the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago have sued the Trump administration to block National Guard troops being deployed to Chicago. The president's plan to do the same in Portland was blocked yesterday by a federal judge. Tam, based on your reporting, what's the president's end game? What is he trying to gain by sending in these troops?
The president has talked about wanting to send troops into cities for a long time. He has continued this. I mean, this goes back to when he was in office before, during 2020 in the wake of the George Floyd protests. And this is a continuation of that, pushing it further. Today, though, he was asked if he would invoke the Insurrection Act, which would give him even greater power. And he said he hasn't needed to do that yet. Part of this is having this fight, having this public fight with Democratic cities. And part of it is that there are true believers in the Trump White House, including Stephen Miller, who believe that ICE agents are directly under attack and that the National Guard is needed to protect them.
And Amy, we talk so much about the impact on these cities and the Democratic leaders. What's the potential impact, the potential political liability for President Trump with this perceived executive overreach?
Yeah, well, it is being seen right now when you look, again, just look at that poll that came out from CBS. 58% disapprove of sending National Guard into the cities. This is one of those issues that it's not just that it's polarizing. Republicans absolutely supportive of it, Democrats absolutely against it. But independent voters really do not like what they are seeing with this. And I think that's really what it comes down to. You know, we've seen over the course of the first term, but certainly in the second term, the president's decision to really target blue cities, states, whether it is with National Guard troops, whether it's cutting funding or holding up funding in those states. It's very clear that his agenda is to make the states that did not vote for him, there's a price to pay for that versus the red states that did.
Yeah. In the time that remains, I want to talk about redistricting because voting apparently kicks off in California today as voters decide the fate of their redistricting measure. There are new maps in Texas that are subject to a court hearing. There are fresh efforts by Republicans in Utah and Nebraska to redraw those maps. Let's talk about California. What does the polling suggest there? How might that might go?
Yeah. The polling right now suggests that the Yes campaign, so it would allow the redrawing of these lines to go through, is ahead. But there's still a lot of people who are undecided on this. They haven't heard a lot about this. So this next month is going to be critically important on persuasion. Donald Trump, not surprisingly, playing a starring role in this in a state where he is deeply unpopular. But for the folks who are trying to defeat this proposition, the issue of fairness, basically overriding an independent commission, letting politicians draw district lines, that's also very unpopular. So that's where they're going to go in terms of their messaging. Utah is also fascinating. It's one of the few states where Democrats may get an opportunity to expand their reach. This is not exactly a blue state, but the city of Salt Lake City is very Democratic. And this came through a court decision that had been litigated for the last couple of years. If this new map is approved by the judge, this could give Democrats an opportunity in 2 districts in Utah.
More to come. Amy Walter, Tamara Keith, our thanks to you both.
You're welcome.
And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by friends of the NewsHour, including Robert S. Kaplan and Wendy J. Selden through the Raymond James Charitable Endowment Fund.
It really matters when you have an opportunity to give back.
Being part of something that's bigger than myself, that's what brings me happiness.
Being able to integrate your professional career with some of these other things that are important to you, it's critical to be happy at the end of the day.
You know, this is our community too, and we want to participate and give back to it.
People want those opportunities to make an impact and a difference.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. The John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.